The Gemara that we're learning, we went through a very interesting Gemara yesterday regarding the law of a person trusting in Hashem completely, or should a person try to find themselves, try to work and find time to learn Torah. In other words, the Gemara that we learned discussed the idea of the option of maybe a person should just study Torah all day and rely on miracles. And of course, it doesn't seem to fly in the mind of most people. Most people would say, God helps those that help themselves. But there is a thought in the Gemara, and that is that the mitzvah is a person should learn Torah day and night. You should never separate yourself from Torah. And that thought, possibly, that idea, that law, possibly means to tell you that maybe you should rely somewhat on miracles. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai seems to follow that way of thinking. But Rabbi Yishmael argued on that, and Rabbi Yishmael said that Hanheg Bahen Minhag Derech Eretz, while you're involved with learning Torah, make sure to include the norm of the way of the land, which means have a job as well. So this was a discussion that we got into about the idea of a person learning in Kailo, because there are many yeshivas in Israel. They have kollels, many independent organizations that are kollels. Some are connected to a yeshiva, some are their own entity, kollels, and they have thousands and thousands of rabbis and people studying. And to a certain extent, they don't really make enough money to cover their expenses. They sort of rely on miracles. Now, of course, you do have some that do make a living. They do teach in certain seminaries and schools, and they have, little side businesses and things like that. And that is obviously fine. There's nothing wrong with that. They're not relying on miracles. They have their method of making a living, and that is okay. But there are others that get paid a very small stipend from their kollel, and they sort of rely on miracles. They'll borrow money from this gemach and that gemach. They don't really have a means to pay it back, and it becomes questionable. Is that the appropriate way that Hashem wants people to live? And from our Gemara seemed to say, at least Abaye seemed to conclude and give some type of a clarification of what the halacha should be, because we had these two views, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And Abaye comes along and says, it would seem that the appropriate way to follow is Rabbi Yishmael, and that is to make a living and do things according to the way of the land, derech eretz, hanheg bahen minhag derech eretz, and that would be the appropriate way. That's what it seems like from the Gemara. So I tried to give shed a little light, even though as a Lubavitcher, we don't exactly buy into the kollel lifetime kollel way of living, but I did want to shed some light on the way other, that there are many ultra orthodox groups that do feel this is the appropriate way. It's a very interesting way of trying to live and serve Hashem. And I wanted to shed some light. So I mentioned a few points. And one was that our Gemara does say, Harbe asu. Many did like this. And many did like Rabbi Yishmael, had jobs, and they were able to learn. It worked. Things worked. They were able to learn and make a living because, if you don't make a living, you end up not learning Torah and not making a living. And so many did like Rabbi Yishmael. They made a living and they were also able to learn Torah, and it worked. And others tried to follow Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's way of don't make a living, God will provide, and rely on miracles. And many tried that, and it did not work. They ended up getting into debt, not being able to learn Torah, not having putting food on their table, not supporting their family. And so many tried that, and it didn't work. And so that seems to to imply like Rabbi Yishmael, that you should really definitely work. But there is a diuk, there is a little point here, and that is that it says many. Many tried this, it didn't work. Many tried that, it did work, which does leave you a little leeway, and that is from the Maharsha, one of the commentaries in the back emphasizes that it does say many. And that means that there is room for individuals that, feel they're able to, reach this higher level to be able to rely on a miracle in this scenario. Normally, you're not supposed to rely on miracles, but in this situation of the mitzvah of learning Torah, they would be allowed to rely on sort of like a miracle and study Torah and hope everything will work out. And so individuals may have a certain. This is not a general rule for the public, but there are individuals, and they do quote a Rambam. And the Rambam is at the end of the laws of Shemitah and Yovel. And let me pull up the Rambam here. The Rambam says that even though this is generally the way of the Levites did not have, they didn't work their fields because they were not given fields in the land of Israel. But it says, the Rambam says, not only is the tribe of the Levites, but any Jew that wants to devote his spirit to understand Hashem and to separate and to stand before Hashem, to serve Hashem and to know Hashem, and goes straight like as Hashem created him, and he removes from himself all the yokes of the accounting and the cheshbonos harabim, all the responsibilities and and all the worldly matters, so that people get themselves into, and the tirdos, I guess the worries of people and the person who removes that yoke, he becomes a kodesh kadoshim, and he can be part of Hashem's portion, and he will merit this world enough to live, just like the Kohanes and the Levites. And David, as David said, Hashem is my portion, and you strengthen, you give me, you uphold my part. And that's how the Rambam ends the laws of Shemitah and Yovel. And what that means, the way they're understanding the Rambam, is that this is a law that's meant for an individual. This is not meant for the common public. This is, okay for an individual. And so if a person reaches, person wants to do that, it seems like they would be allowed to. And that they say fits with the Gemara, because the Gemara here is not a contradiction to our Gemara, because our Gemara is talking about the general public. And the Gemara also hints to the fact that there could be individuals that this is appropriate. For. Now, we also mentioned the Biur Halacha that he mentions this. It mentions this Rambam, and he mentions this idea that it's meant for that the general rule applies to the general public, but there are individuals. And he also says that there is also an exemption, and that is that if people want to support you, that you could live, then of course you're allowed to learn Torah. That's not relying on miracles. If you have people who are saying, we love you so much. You're my grandson, and we're going to support you. You're my son-in-law. I have a good business. I'm going to support you to sit and learn Torah your whole life. If someone wants to do that, or you're a good friend of mine, and I own, big business, and I'm happy to support you because we go back many years, and someone wants to do that. That person is allowed to learn Torah. He's not relying on miracles. He has it. He has his financial set up. And the other option is that if a person wants to do a Yisachar Zavulun partnership, and that is similar to this example, but there's like a partnership that someone tells you, I will pay you money to live, and you give me half of the merit of your Torah study. And that would be called a Yisachar Zavulun partnership, because it was similar to two tribes. One of the tribes studied Torah, the other tribe, the Zavulun, went in the ships, and they would be merchants, and they supported the Yisachar scholars, and this was acceptable. This was a way of living. So this is also not relying on miracles. This is someone is supporting you. So that is these are the way that it's permissible to, for a person to learn Torah. And they're not following Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. They're following the other view of Rabbi Yishmael. They just have it all set. Someone is supporting them. They're all set. They're fine. But to go and ask for support from the community, that would be an interesting question here. See, here we're talking about someone is willing to support you. But for you to go and say, I need charity because I want to sit and learn Torah, that's an interesting question here. And that would be something to add to this discussion. Would that be appropriate for someone to say, I decided that I want to sit and learn Torah. Can you, I would like you to support me. You have a mitzvah of charity. Can you give me charity? Now, that would be an interesting addition to this discussion. So in other words, what we mentioned here were really two things, and that is, one is a person who is being supported by someone on their own decision that they want to, their own kindness, they want to support you, maybe like a father-in-law sometimes does for their son-in-law, and that would be acceptable. And then we mentioned that if a person is on a holy level, he feels his heart is, very spiritual and able to rely on Hashem. That was the Rambam, that he could follow that way of life. He could follow Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And then you have this other third example, and that is unclear here. Is it appropriate for someone to decide they want to follow Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but they don't have full trust that Hashem is going to provide? They want to kvetch people to give them support. And that would be something that I guess we could be discussed. Ezra had a question. Ezra? You're muted.
No, it was about something that you said before, that you said the Levites didn't have fields, but they had cities, and they had the 2,000 amot beyond the city boundaries, and that area was in fact used, or at least a portion of that area was in fact used for fields. So from what my understanding was, the Levites did have fields. But that's neither here nor there. With respect, just that was, I don't know. So,
Rabbi.
Yes, David, do you want to answer Ezra's question?
Yes. The fields that the Levites had were like small vegetable gardens that they were allowed to tend to. They weren't fields that needed a lot of work. They were just small individual vegetable gardens instead of actual fields.
But even so, they still had requirements on giving, Meiser and Meiseroni.
But the fields weren't meant to support them. The fields were just additional perks of having vegetable gardens, but their actual support came from everyone else, that the tzedakah that they gave to the Levi, that's what supported them, not the fields.
The understanding, thank you, David. Yeah, the understanding that I have is that there was nowhere near the fields that the regular Jew was given as a portion, was nowhere near the size of what the Levites had for their whole city. They had they had some field outside their city. The other, the regular individual that inherited the land, they had field. They could live on the farm. They were able to live from their farmland. The Levites had sadois uchramim, but it's a little unclear like what that meant. And David is sharing, I guess, from I guess you read it somewhere. What you're quoting, David, is that that they had?
Rabbi Gordon.
So I'm sure there's some source that they, whatever it was that they had, but it seems that it was nowhere comparable to making a living. You know what I mean? It was whatever it was, whether it was, the simple understanding. I think when you had outside of a city, there was beautification. There was sadais, fields and krumim and vineyards, but not exactly like individual property for each. I don't know that they were divided up into individual property. Maybe it was something nice. People could come picking strawberries, but as David says, that it was they had small gardens, which I'm not sure. Is that referring to, David, that their houses, they were able to have small little gardens in front of their house, like we have in big cities? We have a little grass like the size of a few feet. Or is that what they're referring to, or are they referring to the outside the city? There was something called, there was an open area, and then there was 1,000 amos around the city of sadais and krumim, fields and vineyards. So I'm not sure the what you're quoting, David, if that's referring to right outside their house, or is that referring to outside the city? I'm
not sure. It might have been both. But it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't fields the way everybody else had fields.
Right. So it's something to look into if someone wants to do a little research about the Levites' fields. There are definitely verses in the Torah about it, that the Levites. I mean, this is, the Rambam is not making up this on his own. This is based on there's verses in the Torah about the Levites, not having a portion in the land. So there must be many commentaries on these verses.
Their fields were not meant to support them. Their fields were just additional little, like to grow local vegetables for their family. But their support was coming from the entire Jewish people. Now that was not to support them, those fields.
Right. No, correct. In other words, our question is answered. It's just if someone wants to look into this, it would be nice to clarify to what extent did they have fields, and what those fields outside the cities, to what extent did they own, and what type of portions did they have in those? Okay, Susan, you had a question.
I have a question about where does the kibbutz fit in with all of this?
Well, kibbutzim is a new concept, and it sort of has something to do with communism, that they sort of wanted.
But the land that the kibbutz is on, doesn't that keeps the Jewish community alive?
Well, kibbutzim was sort of like an invention where people would give up all their money, and everyone is equal, and you can't, no one makes more money than anyone else, and it's an interesting way of living. And
most of the kibbutzim were not religious.
Right. Did I say anything? Yeah.
There were only a few religious kibbutzim.
Right. So they weren't religious either. So that's another story. So it's really not connected to anything here that we're learning about.
My two brothers lived on a kibbutz that was
religious. Yeah, there are a few. That's true. There are a few still around, but it's anyway, it's not really connected to our discussion about laws of having a portion in the land and farmland and so on. Each person has a farm, it's not really connected. So so that's the discussion here about learning in Kollel and relying on miracles from Hashem. And what it would seem is that the idea of learning Torah and relying on Hashem to support you is it doesn't really fit the general concept of us trying not to rely on miracles. So it's not the general, definitely not the general rule for the general public. And if a person is in the league that they could become a great scholar, then maybe what they should do is use their knowledge to teach others. And by doing that, they can support themselves even without, working a mundane, a secular job. They can work within within teaching. In other words, why are they sitting and learning Torah and not utilizing their knowledge and teaching others and getting paid? In other words, why don't they go get a job in one of the high schools teaching, or one of the elementary schools, or even in the Kollel, they could get a job as a teacher there instead of just studying. In this way, they could support themselves and their families and not rely on miracles. The idea specifically that we're discussing is sitting and learning and not doing something for the community. And it's definitely questionable if they're like, what purpose are they serving if they're just becoming holier themselves and not actually helping the community in any shape or form. It's just simply them sitting and learning. So there is a nice way that it's done, like in different cities where the community benefits from the Kollel, where the Kollel brings Torah to the community. And that's actually another invention that was created, where it's called a community Kollel, where the people don't just sit and learn and for the rest of their life, they sit and learn and do nothing for the world. Instead, they actually move out to a community where they actually help the community bring up the level of Torah in the community. They give classes to the community. They're rabbis that you could ask them questions, and that adds a new dimension also to this discussion, because what they're doing is they're getting supported by the community, but they're actually giving to the community. They're teaching the community. So they're, in essence, what they're really doing is becoming teachers and rabbis in the community, in the local community. And by doing that, they're making a living from the community, but they're not just relying on miracles. They're getting supported by the community, but they're giving to the community as well. So they're really just getting, they're really getting paid, from the community for the work that they're doing. It's not always exact. In other words, they're not always getting like a salary clearly from the community. It's sort of like donations from the community, but it does flow a lot better than just having other people support you because you're sitting and learning Torah for yourself. Here, you're giving them and they're supporting you. So it adds the idea that, number one, you're not really relying on miracles. You're being supported. And number two, you're giving to the community, so they're benefiting from you. Yes, Susan.
Is there a community in Miami like that?
Yeah, sure. In fact, in North Miami Beach, there's a Kollel here that, at night, the entire community here participates. Not the entire, but maybe 70% of the community pops in there, whether it's, to daven or to go to a class or to, they benefit. They need a book. Sometimes they could come there and study. So, on a day that's like a holiday, that they don't go to work. You might pop in there. There are classes, so there are such programs here in Florida. Yes, Robert.
I mean, essentially, that's the model that Chabad works upon, is it not?
It's sort of, yeah. It's sort of. It's not.
It's a hybrid, let's say.
It's not only teaching Torah, and right. It's the reason why it's not is we're not. You see, the Kollel, that the style of the community Kollel is it's an interesting model where it's a template where you're dividing your day into like 3/4 for your own spiritual needs. In 1/4, you're giving to the community. Or maybe, maybe dividing the day into 8ths, and you're doing, 7/8 for yourself and 1/8 for the community. The Chabad motto is sort of like your whole day is giving to the community. So it's a little, it's a little different because you're fully, you're fully involved in the community. Of course, you have to daven and, you're learning a little for yourself, but I would see it as much more, supporting the community rather than the community supporting you for your own learning, much more for the community.
Rabbi,
I think Ben, you have Ben had a
Yeah, I
question.
wanted to say the community also needs a shoichet, or they need the moels, they need somebody to test the mezuzahs. So there's a lot of work in the community that learned people, learned in the Torah need to do.
Yeah, the problem is most kollel people aren't sofers and aren't sheikhets. So
Well,
they're not
maybe
helping the
after,
community.
maybe after the kollel,
Maybe they should. Maybe
That's
they
what
should
they
learn those
become.
things. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the kollel programs don't give you so much practical laws, and that's pretty sad. If they would give the practical laws, that would actually add a nice element to the community. David, did you want to say something?
yeah, I think in the Lubavitch kollel, when they would have a kollel, it would be for only 1 or 2 years after marriage, and it wouldn't be for their own personal development. It would be for their development to withstand being sent to Panama or wherever in order to have to serve the Jewish community there. And sometimes those rabbis need an extra year or 2 of strengthening to be sent to some foreign place where there's no kosher food, there's no education, etc.
Right. No, Robert was talking about not the kollel part of the after you get married. He's talking about when you go out, you're sort of being supported by the community. So or you're fully being supported by the community. So it's similar to the community kollel style. And not, in other words, not the Lubavitch kollel, the community kollel is similar to the Lubavitch shliach. That's what he was referring to. But yeah, you're right. There is a concept of kollel even in Chabad, but it's like the first year of marriage. You study for a year Torah to have your marriage as a base for your married life, your new mode of life. The essence should be Torah study. So my time is sort of up, but I do want to do a little piece of Gemara. So if it's not too hard for everyone to stay with us for another 5 minutes, is that okay? Does anyone have to leave? No? Okay.
it turns into 15 usually.
Okay, so let's just go a few more minutes. So the Gemara that we're up to is Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana. Rabba Bar Bar Chana. I should just mention the previous Gemara. There was one line that one point that I didn't mention as a review, and that is that Rava told the rabbis, please don't show your face to me during the months of Nisan and Tishrei, because those 2 months are the days of harvest and the days of the pressing of the wine, and those months are important for you to be at work. Those are the most important months, and if you go there, if you do your work, then you'll be able to stay with me a whole year. You'll be able to study a whole year. So make sure to make money during those 2 months so that you'll be able to stay with me. Don't think that you're going to be learning those months and then you'll ruin your whole sustenance for the whole year. Now the Gemara continues and says, Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana Rabbi Yechanan Mishum Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi. Rabba Bar Bar Chana says in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, name of Rabbi Yechanan, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi, and he says, come and see. The earlier generations are not like the later generations. The early generations, our ancestors, asu Teirasan Kva umalachtan arai. They used to make their Torah a permanent thing, and their work was more temporary. In both their work, in their Torah study, or their Torah study and their work, both of them were successful. Deris Hachrayim, the later generations, Also, Malachton Keva, they made their work as the main purpose of life. V'Torasan Arai, and their Torah was temporary. Zu v'zu lo niskayma biyadon, and their work and their Torah was unsuccessful. They didn't have success. So the Gemara here is concluding that although you should follow Rabbi Yishmael, which we just learned in the previous Gemara, don't rely on miracles, but at the same time, how much do you need to work? Should you work until you become rich and then work more until you become more rich and work more until, and keep on? Or should you be satisfied and set aside time to learn Torah? So what the Gemara emphasizes here is that a person's Torah should be keva. That should be his main thing. His work is more of a temporary thing. You made enough money to live. You made enough money to that should be more like the temporary. What's the main thing and what's the temporary thing? The permanent thing is the Torah. The temporary thing is your work. Now, this is the way I translated it is, I must say, is not so simple, because obviously there's many religious Jews that they have enough money to live and yet they still go to work. So we'll have to discuss this further. But I'm just reading the Gemara that the emphasis that the Gemara is saying is that your Torah should be permanent and your work should be temporary. And what this is really saying is it's a continuation from the previous Gemara, that although you should go to work, but don't get lost in your work. Some people, they end up getting lost in their work and they never have time to study Torah. And here, the Gemara tells us that you want to be successful, your Torah should be the main thing and your work should be more of a temporary nature. Yes, Ezra.
Isn't the definition of Nikayama sustainable?
Oh, that's
this was sustainable in their hands. Means they were able to achieve both.
I mean, I guess you're right. A little more literal than I translated it, but it ends up being the same. I mean, but you're right. I guess niskaima would mean it existed, it worked, and which means it was successful. And niskaima, it didn't last, which basically means it was unsuccessful. But yeah, I like that. Your translation is a little more literal. Niskaima, that it existed. It was sustainable. Well, Niskaima biyadon. Yeah.
Niskaima came to fruition.
Yeah.
What? Came to fruition.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess we'll stop at that place. We did a little more of Gemara. Okay. Sei gesund, everyone. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Stay safe, everybody.